I would like to present to you a proposal for the creation of a democratically elected structure that would represent all 7 million Armenians in the diaspora. Armenians have long expressed their fervent desire for unity by delivering fiery speeches, singing patriotic songs, and reciting nationalistic poems, such as the immortal words of Yiddish Charents, "O Hai Jovurt, Komiak Pergutuna, Ko Havakagan Uji Meche." O Armenian people, your salvation lies solely in your collective power. However, the very fact that Armenians constantly speak about unity is a clear indication that their most cherished dream remains an illusion. Despite all the talk about unity, Armenians have often been at odds with each other and marched to the beat of different drummers, even at the most perilous times of their history. In recent years, however, a growing number of Armenians have come to the realization that a collective effort is necessary if they are to survive as a dispersed ethnicity detached from its homeland. Armenian communities are getting gradually swallowed up by the irresistible tide of assimilation. Several Armenian schools in Europe and North America, established after large-scale migrations in recent decades from the Middle East and Armenia, are having great difficulty attracting new students and risk closing down. Armenian churches are mostly attended by the elderly, and fewer young men and women are joining the ranks of traditional Armenian organizations. As a result, Armenian communities are losing their vibrancy and distinct cultural identity. These communities are following the tragic path of earlier Armenian community settlements in Eastern Europe and the Far East, which vanished without a trace. In addition to the need to preserve their culture, Armenians around the world share a common quest for justice from Turkey and a firm commitment for the security and economic prosperity of the twin republics of Armenia and Artsakh. In pursuit of such lofty goals, the Armenian government, as well as diaspora individuals and organizations, have sought various ways to coordinate their collective efforts. Armenians have started to realize that a small nation divided into countless fragments cannot survive for long, let alone thrive, and that they can benefit immensely from pooling their limited resources and jointly tackling common problems facing all diaspora communities. As a result, some preliminary successes have been registered in coalition building. Both the worldwide Diaspora Armenian Fund and the US-based United Armenian Fund, consisting of a coalition of multiple Armenian organizations, have carried out large-scale humanitarian work in Armenia and Artsakh in a coordinated and efficient manner in the past 20 years. In recent years, a new coalition has been formed in Los Angeles, the United Armenian Council, which is the coordinating body of 34 local Armenian organizations. The Armenian government has also made an effort at unity by establishing the Diaspora Ministry, which is supposed to serve as a bridge between Armenians scattered throughout the world and their homeland. While all of these efforts are worthwhile and contribute greatly to the consolidation of resources and manpower, I find them to be fragmentary and not an optimal modality for unity. I would like to propose a framework that is based on the twin concepts of legitimacy and democracy. It envisages the establishment of a democratically elected body that would legitimately represent all Armenians throughout the diaspora, except those in Armenia and Artsakh, who already reside within elected state structures. Under the proposed scheme, for the first time in diaspora's history, Armenians around the globe would be able to elect their own representatives and leaders on the basis of one man, one vote. To form a structure that represents the estimated 7 million Armenians in diaspora, elections would be held via regular mail, email, or in person on the basis of the following formula. Candidates meeting certain pre-established qualifications would seek to represent 20,000 Armenian voters in a given electoral district. Pre-registered Armenian voters would have to be at least 18 years old and have a verifiable electronic or mailing address. Voters would participate in elections regardless of their citizenship, country of origin, and religion or political affiliation. In countries with large Armenian populations, more than one representative would be elected, each one representing 20,000 Armenians. On the other hand, in parts of the world where there are small Armenian communities, only one individual would be elected to represent 20,000 Armenians spread over several countries. Initially, there may be a low turnout of voters. However, as the new structure gains strength and legitimacy, succeeding elections would attract more participants. Elections do not have to be carried out simultaneously throughout the diaspora. They could be held initially in one county or region, such as LA County, to test the feasibility of the electoral procedures. I'm pleased that a similar plan is being developed in France, enabling Armenians in the country to elect their representatives. It is important to note that only those elected by the Armenian public at large can truly claim to represent Armenians residing in their countries or regions, unlike other organizational leaders who can only claim to represent their own members. Consequently, the collective body of 350 elected representatives from throughout the diaspora, representing 20,000 Armenian voters each, would form the structure that can legitimately claim to speak in the name of all 7 million Armenians worldwide outside of Armenia and Artsakh. Popular elections would not only grant legitimacy to those elected, but would also encourage a silent majority to get involved in greater numbers in community affairs. This would be a dramatic shift from the current situation where a small number of individuals work around the clock, sacrificing their time and effort, while most Armenians who are unaffiliated with any organization remain disengaged and disinterested. Should the proposed grassroots elections succeed, large numbers of Armenians would feel empowered and energized for the first time, having actively participated in choosing their own representatives and leaders. This collective body of 350 elected representatives would deal with all aspects of Armenian life. It would elect a chairperson or speaker and have committees and subcommittees dealing with important all-encompassing issues such as culture, language, religion, education, finance, international affairs, Armenian minority rights, relations with Armenia and Artsakh, the Armenian genocide, and restitution from Turkey. This body would meet once a year and adopt decisions on the basis of majority vote or on certain critical issues by 2/3 majority. Decisions thus taken would reflect the views of the entire diaspora, not just a particular faction of the community. Meanwhile, existing Armenian organizations would continue to function as before with no hindrance or competition from this new transnational entity. In fact, the existing groups would expand their reach and increase their clout by lobbying the elected representatives of this new collective body to adopt their agendas. Furthermore, since today's diasporan leaders are prominent members of their respective communities, it would not be surprising to see many of them get elected to this new structure. One of the objectives of this new structure would be to gain NGO status at the UN and other regional and international organizations, having the right to represent all Armenians in the diaspora. The representatives of this new body would also play a useful role when interacting with government officials of their respective countries. For example, if officials of a given country would like to meet with representatives of their Armenian community, there would be no need for endless acrimonious debates among Armenians as to who should go to such a meeting as the true representative of that community. In addition, Armenian government officials, as well as foreign leaders, would know whom to contact when they need to speak with representatives of the diaspora. Those elected to this new body would also endorse candidates in local or national elections in their respective countries. Such endorsement would be particularly important when multiple Armenian candidates are running for the same office, as recently happened in Glendale, resulting in a split in the Armenian vote and the defeat of all Armenian candidates. This representative body could end such internal disputes by endorsing the most qualified candidates. Before launching such an ambitious initiative, a team of researchers must be appointed to carry out the following important tasks. First, conduct a study as to how Greek, Italian, Jewish, and Lebanese diasporas are organized in order to learn from their experiences. The researchers would then explore and determine the optimal mechanisms to conduct elections worldwide, estimate the demography of each community, establish qualifications for both voters and candidates, and recommend measures to prevent voter fraud. Clearly, a single electoral plan cannot be applied uniformly to all Armenian communities worldwide. Since each community lives in a unique legal and political environment, it would be necessary to devise appropriate plans for selecting representatives in each country in consultation with local leaders. The researchers could also propose significant details about the structure and functions of the collective bodies, committees and subcommittees, recall procedures, and term limits. Secondly, long before organizing elections and establishing the new structure, those studying the feasibility of such a concept must contact leaders of major Armenian organizations to discuss the prospects of forming such a structure, to get their input and assess the potential for conflict or cooperation. And finally, the government officials in Armenia and Artsakh must be briefed about the objectives of this initiative and assess their degree of support for such an elected body. If and when this newly created structure is established, its representatives will regularly consult and interact with officials of Armenia and Artsakh. However, it is critical to maintain the independence of this diaspora-wide body in order to shield Armenia's officials from being pressured by foreign powers to influence the decisions of this new entity. I know that what is being proposed is extremely ambitious and maybe even impossible to accomplish. If it were easy, it would have been done a long time ago. We must bear in mind that difficult tasks are the ones we're tackling because, if successful, they bear the most fruit. If the Armenian diaspora could form a transnational structure composed of elected representatives, Armenians would be creating for the first time a legitimate, united, and democratic institution that has economic and political clout and is capable of supporting Armenians and Artsakh's interests, preserving Armenian cultural values, and defending Armenian rights around the globe. Thank you.
Very interesting, but I want you to ask I want to ask you one question, because then we will move on. And what role do you envision for the Armenian Bar Association?
Well, I just came here, and thank you for your kind invitation, allowing time in your private schedule. I would like to present this concept to the executive board and the membership, and it's up to you to decide if you would like to deal with it, look into it, study it. I think we need some competent, talented people, and there's no shortage of them in the Armenian Bar, to see if it's feasible, what the next steps are, what are the possibilities. So it's up to you. I'll just present the idea.
Okay, thank you. This is the Armenian Bar, that's why I wanted to ask. Great thoughts. Sonia?
One quick question. Several years ago, there was a group that was all across Europe. The contact person that I spoke to was a guy named Igan Bayramian in Geneva. How does this idea mesh with that one, which was for a Diaspora World Congress? Is this the same idea that's now being refined, or is this a competing idea?
Well, I had a part in my speech, I cut it short for time, but there are a variety of concepts in different parts of the world, in Moscow, in Paris, several in Los Angeles. But the idea that I present is unique from the perspective that it's the only one where every Armenian in diaspora has the right to vote, to elect their representatives. All the rest are appointed. They appoint delegates, they appoint representatives, so-and-so represents you. In my book, no one has the right to represent any one of us unless we vote for them. So it's a democracy, the way we practice in this country. We elect members of Congress and etc. So the rest of them are appointed, they have delegates appointed in different countries, they have congresses, or they are coalitions of organizations. Organizations themselves have two problems. One, they only represent at most 5% of the Armenian population. And second, they represent only their own membership. They don't represent the public at large. So this is a different approach. It's much more difficult. It's easier to bring 10, 20, 30 heads of groups together in one room. That can be done maybe in 24 hours, if need be. But this one is much more complex, complicated. But if it's effectively implemented, it gives legitimacy, representation that we've never had before in our entire history.
Has this idea been floated anywhere else, or are we the first ones to hear it?
Well, there was a symposium at USC a little over a year ago where it was proposed there, but it was received very positively. In fact, we had a show of hands at the end. There were 700 people. We asked who would support such an idea. I think there were only a handful of people who said no. There were 99% said yes. But the problem we have is what Edwin was asking. We need really a credible group who would not just emotionally appeal to people's emotions, really sit down and calmly and rationally analyze, plan, and see if it's feasible. And that's why the Armenian Bar may be such an independent, competent group to do this. So that's why I'm bringing it here to you.
Okay, thank you.